They claimed I would never dare, that I lacked the courage to confront the foreign mining cartels draining Africa for generations. In Europe's boardrooms, executives laughed, dismissing me as just another young African leader shouting empty threats. Mining lobbyists sneered, calling me a soldier who knew nothing about economics. Even within my own circle, advisors whispered warnings that I was moving too fast, too recklessly, against powers too entrenched to fight. But they were wrong. While they underestimated me, I was already tearing apart their extraction empire, brick by brick, across this continent. And what I'm about to tell you is not just Burkina Faso's fight. It is Africa's blueprint to finally end its role as the world's mining colony. My name is Ibrahim Traoré, and this is the story of how I launched a full-scale economic war on Europe's African mining empire. Let me begin with the truth they never wanted you to hear. For decades, while African presidents smiled for cameras and signed glossy development deals, European mining corporations were building something sinister, a hidden network of pipelines that sucked out our gold, our resources, our lifeblood, and funneled it directly into European banks. They believed we were too poor to resist, too desperate to say no, too divided to rise. But I was watching. I saw everything. Do you want to know the exact moment this fire began? 3 weeks ago, during a live interview with Radio Bena, I said something that detonated across boardrooms from Paris to London. I announced clearly and without hesitation, several mining permits have already been revoked, and more will follow. But it wasn't just words. What came next shattered their illusion of control. I asked the question Europe never thought an African leader would voice. If we know how to exploit our gold, why do we allow multinationals to exploit it for us? That single question shook markets. Mining stocks collapsed overnight. Emergency meetings were called in Brussels, in Paris, in London. Suddenly, they understood this wasn't empty talk. This was the declaration of Africa's economic independence. What I revealed on that broadcast was never about paperwork or licenses. It was about exposing the mask of an entire system designed to keep Africa poor while Europe grew rich. Here's how their scam worked. European companies extracted billions in gold and rare minerals from our soil. They paid token taxes. They shipped the raw wealth to Europe, refined it into finished goods, then sold those same goods back to Africa at inflated prices. The profits filled European shareholders' pockets, while African nations were told to be grateful for scraps, jobs, and aid. It was colonial exploitation dressed up as globalization. And during that same interview, I said what every African leader knows, but few dare to say. These same corporations never hesitate to ally with imperialist forces that thrive on keeping us weak. Understand this. This is not anti-Europe rhetoric. This is not anti-West ideology. This is pro-Africa economics. The facts, the numbers, the evidence all make it clear. This fight isn't just Burkina Faso's. It is Africa's roadmap to end foreign plunder forever. Before we began canceling permits, Burkina Faso was already one of Africa's top gold producers. But behind that statistic hid a brutal truth. More than 40% of our people lived in poverty. Billions in profits flowed overseas, while the communities living above the gold fields were left with polluted water, scarred lands, and shattered promises. That era is finished. For decades, Europeans promised that wealth would eventually trickle down, that if their corporations made billions, schools, hospitals, and jobs would follow. But instead, they drained everything and left us with nothing. Profits flowed straight into European banks, while our villages stayed in darkness. Even when governments attempted reforms, foreign corporations twisted the contracts, reducing Africa to a bargain basement extraction zone. So I rewrote the rules. We created SOPI and enforced full apex state control. For the first time, gold revenues were deposited directly into the Burkina treasury. But I didn't stop there. We made processing and refining, not just raw extraction, national priorities. Investments shifted towards schools, hospitals, and infrastructure. For once, our resources began serving the people who lived above them, not shareholders living oceans away. Then came my radio broadcast. Within hours of my announcement, European financial markets convulsed. Mining executives who had operated comfortably for decades held emergency sessions deep into the night. Analysts downgraded African mining stocks. European officials placed urgent diplomatic calls across the continent. They understood something unthinkable. What I declared was not confined to Burkina Faso. This was the spark of a continental uprising. I made it clear if you refuse to respect African sovereignty, you forfeit access to African resources. But here's what unsettled Europe's mining elite most. I was not acting in isolation. Mali was already reviewing our model. Niger was launching audits of foreign contracts. Guinea began re-examining concessions signed under corrupt regimes. For the first time in decades, Africa was no longer begging for scraps of investment. We were aligning economic strategies. Burkina Faso cancels European permits. Mali reopens mining files. Niger inspects multinational operations. Guinea initiates investigations. One by one, the dominoes tipped, and suddenly, corporations that had always dealt with divided governments found themselves staring at something they had never prepared for, a united continental front. Their timeless weapon of divide and rule was disintegrating. During that same interview, I was asked about Thomas Sankara's vision for political orientation. My answer was simple: what we are doing now is rooted in the foundation he laid 40 years ago. Sankara was ahead of his time. He recognized early that African wealth must fuel African progress. He called for self-reliance instead of dependency, sovereignty instead of exploitation, continental unity instead of rivalry. That was the blueprint. What we are executing today is his dream reshaped for 2025. In 1983, European leaders branded Sankara a dangerous radical. In 2025, they call me the same. But here lies the difference. Africa is no longer standing alone. We now have unity, resources, and continental resolve to transform economic independence from rhetoric into reality. The most important revelation from that interview was not about what we are stripping from European corporations. It was about what we are building in their place. If we want true independence, if we want real sovereignty, if we want Burkina Faso and Africa to finally eat their fill, then this struggle is far greater than mining licenses. This is about restoring dignity. PMI, our state-owned mining enterprise, is now fueling national development. APC is driving agricultural change, cutting food imports and securing self-sufficiency. AES Confederation is building continental cooperation, replacing dependency with made-in-Africa production. And our policy is simple. If a product can be made here in Burkina Faso, it must be purchased here first. This isn't reform. This is revolution. A revolution where young people find work at home instead of dying in deserts chasing European visas. A revolution where African factories rise instead of flooding markets with imports. A revolution where African markets serve African progress. This is the end of foreign plunder. This is the birth of African sovereignty. 6 months after my radio address revealed our mining sovereignty strategy, I can stand before you and say history is being rewritten in Burkina Faso. For the first time since gold was pulled from our soil, its wealth is serving our people. Not Paris, not London, not Geneva, Burkina Faso. European mining executives watch in disbelief as the words I spoke become reality: respect African sovereignty or lose African resources. They called it impossible. They called it reckless. But today, they face the truth they tried to bury. African economic independence is not only possible, it is profitable. And let me be clear, this lesson is not only for them, it is for every African leader still clinging to the mirage of foreign development partnerships. It is for every government still kneeling before corporations that bleed their nations dry. The message is clear. We are no longer a continent that bows to exploitation disguised as aid. We are no longer a marketplace that accepts any terms because we fear we have no choice. We are the continent that controls its resources. We are the continent that builds its industries. We are the continent that shapes its own destiny. European corporations can adapt, or they can be replaced. That decision is theirs. But understand this, our decision is already made. We choose independence. We choose resource sovereignty. We choose an Africa that serves Africans first. Everything else is negotiable. Our sovereignty is not. And what followed surpassed even my own expectations. In weeks, the fire spread across the continent. It was no longer just about gold, no longer only about mining. It was about total African transformation. Recruitment surged. More than 30,000 citizens joined the army in record time. Nations began to rally. Chad's president called me 3 days after the broadcast. Ibrahim, your mining model. We want it here. Guinea's leaders reached out quietly, seeking technical guidance to establish their own state-owned mining company. Even governments, once cautious of defying the West, began requesting consultations on resource sovereignty. And then came the earthquake. For the first time in history, the African Union opened discussions on continental mining coordination. Not just cooperation, coordination. That word means everything. Today, 12 African nations are re-examining foreign mining contracts. 8 are enforcing local first purchasing policies. 6 are building state-owned mining companies. And new continental resource sharing agreements are being drafted in real time. What keeps European executives awake at night isn't what I've already done. It's what comes next. During that interview, I said something most people overlook. 2025 is decisive, and we will move forward to reclaim the remaining 30%. I wasn't speaking about physical territory. I meant economic territory, resource sovereignty, continental independence. And the greatest shift is not happening in Ouagadougou or Bamako. It is unfolding in London, Paris, Washington, and Beijing, inside the financial centers of those who once dictated our fate. For the first time in centuries, Africa is setting the rules of engagement, and the rules are clear. Transparent partnerships or no partnerships, local processing before export, mandatory technology transfer, environmental safeguards, community benefit guarantees. Those who reject these terms are learning a new reality. They can be replaced. Chinese firms, despite their own history here, are agreeing to transparency. Russian partners have submitted to full audits without protest. Even some European companies are scrambling to rebrand themselves as African sovereignty compliant to survive. The market itself now rewards those who adapt and punishes those who cling to colonial habits. Corporations that once strutted through Africa like conquerors now find themselves locked out. Not because of hostility, but because they refuse to meet the standards of sovereignty. Their entire business model rested on one assumption, that African leaders would always trade long-term independence for short-term revenue. That assumption is bankrupt. European executives have learned the lesson the hard way, and they will not be the last. So the question is no longer if the world will respect Africa's resource sovereignty. The only question is how much it will cost them to learn, because one way or another, they will learn. The age of African economic colonialism is over. What comes next depends only on how quickly the world adjusts to this new order. But for young Africans listening now, understand something vital. This transformation did not happen because I am unique. It happened because Africa is ready. Ready to control our resources. Ready to build our industries. Ready to author our own destiny. The only question left is this: are you ready to join in building an Africa that puts Africans first? My name is Ibrahim Traoré, and this is the story of how Africa reclaimed its economic independence,